Hello and welcome back to Signal Theory 111. So in this video, we're going to do a further continuance of the crypto fundamentals. In the last video, we talked about security and how you can secure yourself before you even get involved in crypto. We talked about a couple of the different avenues by which there is risk in crypto and how you can mitigate that risk. So in this video today, we're going to expand on this a little bit more. And then we're going to branch out into some of the essential accounts that you will want to use as a crypto investor. Okay, we're not going to get into specifics like which companies to use, just an idea of how you might structure your foray into crypto. And of course, this is all going to be filtered around the idea of control as well. Okay, because that's a huge thing with crypto, the sovereignty that you can attain with crypto. That having that control is very important. Okay, so let's go back to this core principle that we've talked about already in this series. So first things first, ownership depends entirely on control. Okay, so in traditional finance, you're trained to believe that just because you can see the balance on your screen, that is ownership. What we all know nowadays is that is not the case. Whenever you deposit into a bank or you're looking at your stock holdings, that is, sure, it's numbers that your name is on, but it doesn't really define the control. Because if something were to happen to the centralized exchange you're using, or something were to happen to your stock brokerage, at the end of the day, the recourse is very limited as to how you can actually be compensated for your losses. Okay, so with crypto, that control is what defines the ownership. It's not just a number on the screen. It's something that you actually own, and especially whenever you get into some of your decentralized wallets. Using a centralized exchange is a little bit different, but we'll get into that. So in crypto, you actually remain sovereign and you retain that control of your assets. Okay, so one thing we want to understand before we start choosing what tools we're going to use is what actually gives you authority over the assets that you have. So this is how traditional finance will work. Okay, so whenever you're looking at your bank account, it represents money that feels like it's yours, but it's in the bank's name. The bank holds it. They are the custodian of your money. So they custody these assets on your behalf, and this creates a layer of separation from the actual control that you should have over your finances. One of the good things, at least, about this is, some of the mistakes that happen can be undone. Some of the fraud that takes place can be challenged, and there are protections that exist, although sometimes it's a little bit tedious to have to go through that stuff. And in the case of catastrophic failures, that kind of protection is not going to matter much whenever everybody needs to be reimbursed. We'll see how well that actually unfolds. But in the base sense of things, traditional finance prioritizes convenience and protection, but not sovereignty. And this kind of shapes the expectations that people bring into crypto. And this is where crypto kind of breaks that illusion of an account or of ownership. When it comes to your crypto accounts, these are actual windows into the blockchain. This is not just looking onto an account that you see on Wells Fargo or through Huntington Bank. This is actually seeing what you own on the blockchain. And again, with crypto, those keys are what defines the control. Okay, so every wallet has a public key, which is like your wallet address, what you would send people to receive crypto. And there's also a private key as well. The private key is what actually gives you access to that crypto. As long as you own the keys to that account that you're trying to use, you will be able to control those assets. And that's where that definition of control comes in. And again, just to reiterate, the person that holds the keys determines who actually controls the asset. So when we're dealing with centralized exchanges, they're the ones that own the keys. When you're dealing with your private wallet, like a cold wallet or a hot wallet, you are the one that actually holds those keys. So here are the three main ways that people interact with crypto. Different type of custody models, and they're used for different purposes as well. Okay, so the first one, which is something we talk about quite a bit here, and especially in the introductory stages, is your centralized exchanges. So these are platforms that custody assets on your behalf. The second one here would be your private wallets. And this would be, in this case, we're talking about hot wallets. So this is software wallets. And so how these work is, the keys that are generated for each wallet are stored directly within the wallet itself. Okay, you have access to those keys. There are some downsides, which we'll get into a little bit more, but you are the one that actually has access to those keys. And same thing with number 3 here, the cold storage. This is like the next level up past just a private hot wallet. Okay, these wallets hold your keys offline, so it's not connected to any type of software. It's a hardware wallet. So the keys are stored inside that hardware, and this helps minimize the exposure and maximize security for your long-term holdings. Okay, so let's get into centralized exchanges. And this is where, you might prioritize convenience over control. Okay. And one thing to point out here is that most new users, 90% plus, end up joining crypto and interacting with it primarily through a centralized exchange. And the reason is because they're the easiest for onboarding. You can easily sign up. You have to go through a little bit of a KYC process, which we talked about in the last video. But they're easiest to use to convert dollars to crypto, like to go from fiat into crypto or back, to exchange your crypto back into fiat. These provide the easiest on and off ramps to do that. The only downside, or one of the main downsides, is that the platform is what actually holds custody of your crypto. Again, whenever you set up your centralized exchange, you don't get access to the private keys or the seed phrase for your account. The exchange owns that, so therefore, they own the crypto. So let's take a look at why exchanges exist. Okay, the first things first is they provide a lot of liquidity. Okay, and this is something that we'll get into a little bit more, like how liquidity provision works. But just think of it like this. The exchange has a bunch of crypto, and they allow you to use that crypto to buy and sell. They do have very deep liquidity in a lot of senses, so that whenever you're doing your exchanges, you get decent prices. Although I will say exchanges do make a lot of money on spreads, which maybe that's a different video for a different time. But they do provide a lot of liquidity for you to get into and out of crypto easily. Okay. The second thing is price discovery. So this continuous trading establishes transparent market prices, which helps you understand the true asset value. Of course, there are other tools that you can use to find what, true value would be. But simply speaking, we'll leave it at that. And the final thing here is accessibility. So using these centralized exchanges is a little bit easier to navigate than using some of the other stuff that we're going to talk about here in just a minute. This lower barrier to entry makes crypto accessible for new users, especially who aren't ready for the self-custody complexity that comes with some of these later options. So here's the trade-off. On your centralized exchanges, there are certain risks that you have. The first one being platform risk. If the exchange becomes insolvent, or if they get hacked and some of your information gets released out to the dark web, or there's any operational failures, this can directly impact your assets. Another thing is withdrawal restrictions. Platforms can freeze accounts, limit withdrawals, or just straight up shut you down if they don't like what you're doing. This is a big problem. This is something that DeFi, crypto and DeFi, really helps to mitigate. And the final thing here is policy changes. We all agree to the terms and services. We all agree to, we'll follow your rules, but they can change the rules whenever they want. They can add new fees. They can change the way they do things. And you have very little recourse whenever it comes to fixing that stuff or getting around that stuff. And so the final point here to be made is that, again, whenever custody is not yours, decisions are not yours either. So now we're going to get into some of the more self-custody related accounts we're going to use. Okay, so this is the first one that we're going to bring up, which is private wallets. And in this case, I'm talking about a hot wallet. You can consider a cold wallet also private storage, but we'll get into that in the next couple slides. So this is where the control shifts from the exchange to the user. Okay, and again, whenever you set up your crypto wallets, you are the one that hold the keys to those wallets. Private keys remain under your control and not with an exchange. That being said, every time you go to do a transaction, you will have to authorize those transactions. Every time you move crypto around, it requires your signature on the transaction to do so. And this is where responsibility really becomes something that is on the forefront of your mind. With great power, again, comes great responsibility. So having security, having backups, and managing your access is entirely your responsibility. And this is where crypto starts behaving differently from anything else people have used before. We're used to giving up the power to these big exchanges, to the big banks, but now we have to take that stuff a little bit more seriously because we are our own bank. Okay, so if you're going to act like a bank and you want to take control of your finances like a bank, you have to set up security and you have to behave responsibly like a bank would, ideally. Because not all banks behave responsibly, but we won't have to get into that. So one common misconception about wallets is that they are where crypto is stored. In reality, what happens is the crypto that you own lives on the blockchain. Okay, and each wallet has a specific set of cryptographic keys. And whenever you go to use the crypto that you own, that crypto on the blockchain has a matching signature to the keys that are in your wallet, so that only your wallet is able to access those funds. But the funds do, by nature, live on the blockchain, and the keys within your wallet are what grants you the access to be able to interact with that. Okay, this is a little bit of an abstract idea, especially if you're new to the space, but this is one of the most common misconceptions or misunderstandings that early users have about how crypto works. So here is the reality of having a hot wallet. Okay, of course you have more responsibility with this, but there is a level of convenience with it as well. Okay, so the first things first, they're always connected to the internet because these wallets come in the form of a web browser or a mobile application. They're always connected to a piece of software that is exposed to the internet. Okay, while the keys can remain relatively safe as long as you take care of your stuff, you don't have any screenshots or anything saved in your notes with your seed phrases, there is a little bit of risk here because if you connect to a faulty site or you do something that would expose your keys, then you're in a little bit of trouble, or you can get into trouble. Okay. The cool thing about hot wallets is they make signing transactions fast. You only have to confirm the transaction one time and it's good to go. The problem is this leads to a larger attack surface because you're exposed to malware, phishing attempts, remote exploits. Hot wallets aren't necessarily unsafe, but they are just exposed a little bit more than cold wallets, which we'll get into next. So that connectivity to everything conveniently also creates risk. And now let's get into the cold storage, and this would be the top tier of self-custody. Okay, with these types of wallets, your private keys are stored offline. So rather than it being in a piece of software like a web browser or your mobile application, these private keys are stored in a physical device. This system here really helps to minimize those attacks because instead of just confirming a transaction on your browser, you also have to confirm that same transaction on a physical device as well. You know, it makes doing the transactions a little bit slower because there's more steps involved, but having that physical input really helps, treat it like a two-factor authentication for all your transactions. If somebody gains access to a hot wallet, it's as simple as them just sending crypto to their address from yours. Whenever it comes to getting into a cold wallet, it's a little bit different. They can try to do the transaction, but unless they have your physical device, they're not going to be able to get through that second part, which that's the really important part here is that it adds a second layer of verification that you have to do in order to move your funds. So that being said, these are usually designed for assets that you don't necessarily need to access frequently, and it provides maximum security. Although I will say, like on my day-to-day life, I still use a ledger or other cold storage for all of my crypto for the most part. The only thing that I really use hot wallets for specifically is like airdrops, testing out new sites, stuff like that. So for me personally, cold storage is a must. And again, this is not necessarily about being paranoid about things. It's just about being intentional with your risk reduction. You want to hold on to your crypto. It's going to be very valuable one day. So you want to make sure that you're protected against all forms of risk. And so let's take a look at these three and compare, the control versus the convenience here. Okay, so on the first level, you have your centralized exchanges. So this is where you have the maximum convenience, but you have the least amount of control. Okay, it's an easy interface to use, but the platform is what actually controls your crypto. Then the next level, you have your hot wallets. So this is the balance between control and accessibility. Okay, you control the keys, but you're able to go interact with certain things very easily and get around quickly. And then the third stage here would be, again, cold storage. This is where you have the maximum control, but you have a little bit reduced convenience Again, it takes a little bit longer to do transactions, but you are the most secure whenever you use your crypto via cold storage. As convenience increases, control decreases, and vice versa. Understanding these different options and the spectrum in which these lie help you make intentional choices rather than default assumptions. So let's get into that intent, because that is how you can determine how you're going to structure your wallets. It's important to understand that different goals will require different choices. Blindly using one tool for everything is how people lose funds. So the first things first, you want to consider your transactions, how often you're going to be transacting. If you're going to be an active trader or frequently moving assets around, you might be better off using a hot wallet or even, an exchange wallet. If you're someone that's looking to be more of a hodler, even medium to long-term positions, I would recommend, of course, a cold storage wallet, but you're welcome to use hot wallets as well, at least in the situation where you control the keys. I wouldn't, if I'm going to be holding long-term, medium to long-term, I would not having my crypto on a centralized exchange. I would prefer to have something in my own custody. And then finally, if you're going to be a long-term holder, then this is a no-brainer. You always want to go with a cold storage, especially if you don't need to use it very often. You just want to let it sit and grow. Then the cold storage is where you're going to get the most bang for your buck. You're going to get the maximum security and the most control over your assets. Okay, so now that we've gone through some of the different exchanges, some of the different accounts that we're going to use, next step is we'll go through some more specifics. Okay, so we've gone through some of the security stuff, some of the account related stuff. In the next video, what I'm going to do is I'm going to go through and give some examples of some of the services that I use. Okay, I'll go through some of my security protocol. I'll go through some of the wallets and stuff that I use. And then we'll get into, how you might structure this yourself. Okay, so which wallets you might use, how to set them up, and then also how to navigate moving funds between all the different wallets or whatever you're going to use. Okay, so we're going to keep building on this throughout this series, and eventually we're going to get to a point where we're navigating DeFi like pros. But let me leave you with this before we conclude here. Everything you do within crypto and beyond, really, you should live by some creed like this or some motto like this: clarity before action. And it's especially important with crypto, where there's so many scammers, there's so many wrong turns you can make. It's very important to understand certain things, like, especially in the context of this presentation today, where your assets live and who controls them. This foundation of, your custody models, control mechanisms, and intentional structure should precede every practical decision you make in crypto. As you'll see throughout your journey, the tools that you use will evolve. A lot of the platforms you use will change, but the fundamental relationship between the keys and control will remain constant. The idea of what we're doing here will remain the same, even if the tools we use along the way change. Okay, so that being said, looking forward to the next one, and we'll get into some more specifics when the time comes. See you around. Peace.